But if the gravitational constant were a little bit weaker, then the universe would have expanded too quickly for stars to form. And so there'd just be a giant cloud of hydrogen gas or something like that. Okay. And then there'd be no life. So there's a question like, yeah, why is there life? And, that's kind of weird. And so a theory is, well, okay, intelligent design. So maybe there's an intelligent being that has some kind of ability to affect the values of those parameters. And that being realized that like everything good requires there to be some amount of order in the universe. And, like most good things require there to be life. So, that's a not unreasonable theory. Not unreasonable to think that there was an intelligent designer.
Why study philosophy, and can common sense philosophy be rationally defended? Today we will talk about epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics with one of the leading philosophers of our time and one of my favorite authors, Dr. Michael Huemer. And Michael Huemer is a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado, and he is the author of more than 80 academic articles in epistemology, ethics, metaethics, metaphysics, and political philosophy, as well as 10 amazing books that you should immediately buy in his own words. And this is one of his books that I really enjoyed. So, and today, as you know, I usually talk with Christian philosophers on this podcast, but this year I decided to spend some time studying non-Christian philosophers, and I'm thrilled with work of Dr. Michael Huemer, so that's why I'm invited him to our podcast. So, Dr. Huemer, thank you for your time. How are you doing?
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start maybe with some general questions. Why and how did you decide to become a philosopher? What is reason for this decision?
Well, I took a philosophy class in college, in my first year in college, and it turned out to be the most interesting subject. It was a course on philosophy of mind. It was called The Nature of Mind. And the professor was Professor Richard Volheim at UC Berkeley. And he would just sort of stand in the front of the class rambling for the whole time. And nobody knew what the hell he was talking about because as I later realized, he was like, talking way over the heads of everyone. Like he was giving much more advanced material than you would give to an undergraduate. But nevertheless, and we had discussion sections every week, and we just had great conversations about things like whether a computer could be conscious, and the TA, the teaching assistant, posed as a robot and invited us to try to figure out whether she was conscious or not, and predictably nobody could find out. Anyway, so I just thought this was the most interesting subject. Later, some people recommended to me the controversial novelist philosopher Ayn Rand. And it was she who kind of convinced me that philosophy was an important and useful field and not just a fun and entertaining for me field, right? Because of an essay called Philosophy Who Needs It, in which she argues that everyone needs a philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And for many people, philosophy is associated with very complex and strange systems like Kant or Hegel, something like this. And so maybe could you explain to us why philosophy is important for just ordinary people, not people who like Hegel or Kant?
Yeah, well, yes, and Hegel and Kant are very annoying, like very annoyingly incomprehensible people. Well, yeah. So I'll just say what Ayn Rand said. This is not original, but it's a good idea, right? Imagine that. Like here's a story. Imagine that you're an astronaut and you are exploring space, and somehow you lost control of your spacecraft and you crash landed on an alien world. And when you regain consciousness, these questions occur to you. First, where am I? And how can I find out? And what should I do? Okay. And, this is a metaphor for how we're thrown into this world. You're born into the world, and unfortunately, at the time that you're born, you don't have the presence of mind to really ask all the things that you should be asking, but you can ask it now, right? If you find yourself in this world, and you should wonder, where am I? And I mean that not literally in the sense of your geographical location. I mean, like, well, what kind of world are you in? And that's basically metaphysics, right? Like the general nature of reality. And how can I find out? Meaning, just how can I how do I know things in general? How do I know what I know? Right. And then what should I do? Okay. So that, the second one, that's epistemology. And then what should I do? That's basically the question of ethics. Right. And so if you see the appropriateness of wondering these things when you find yourself on an alien world, you should also see the appropriateness of wondering these things right now in the actual world that you're in. Right. So that, so like your philosophy, if you had a philosophical system, it should answer those questions.
Yeah, very simple. It's interesting. And speaking of Kant and Hegel, why did you choose common sense philosophy and over skepticism of Kant or Hegel or Hume or strange philosophy of Hegel? Because so many philosophers, as I see, they prefer these more sophisticated, strange ideas than common sense philosophy. So why did you decide common sense?
Well, I mean, you should really wonder why anyone doesn't believe in common sense. Like, well, the real question is, why would anybody follow, the weird philosophers with highly counterintuitive views, right? Like, it's a mystery to me. And, like in the case of Hegel, thinking that there are contradictions, in reality, like, okay, that's obviously absurd. That's contradictory, in fact. So, right. Like why I follow. So, by common sense philosophy, there's sort of like, there's some figures in the history of philosophy who are like common sense philosophers, like Thomas Reid, and G.E. Moore. Right. And well, basically, things are pretty much the way they seem, unless you have a specific reason to think otherwise. That's what I think. And I think that's basically the fundamental principle of rationality, of rational belief formation. And, like, why do I think that? Well, just, think about for a while, think about how you could form beliefs. And if you think about it, you're going to notice that whenever you're forming beliefs in a way that's roughly truth oriented, you're forming beliefs based upon what seems right to you. And if you wind up saying that I'm wrong, it will be because because what I'm saying doesn't seem right to you. Okay. But that will mean that you're actually forming beliefs in the way that I'm saying that you should form them. Right. So, so there's going to be something self-defeating. If you say that appearances are not a good basis for belief, and that is itself based upon the way things appear to you, then you're in a self-defeating position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just interested, do you understand like statements from Hegel? Because I can't understand him at all. So I don't know how people can understand him.
Yeah. So like, I complained about him endorsing contradictions. I'm not like a Hegel expert or anything, okay? But the other thing to complain about is all of these continental figures, like, they're just so unclear, right? Like, here are the main things that you should be, worrying about when you're writing philosophy. First of all, that people can understand what you're saying. Because if they don't understand what you're saying, then how are they going to learn it? They're not like, how are you going to be transmitting knowledge to other people if they don't even know what you're saying? Okay, so you should try to be as clear as possible. Secondly, you should try to give strong reasons for what you believe, like arguments. And third, you should answer objections to your arguments. Okay, and like these continental figures, and like I would include Hegel and like whatever the existentialists, these French philosophers, and Martin Heidegger and whatever. They're like the most popular philosophers among, like, I guess, I don't know, non-professors and also like people in Europe, like the academics in Europe, as well as like sort of like low-level students in America. But they don't do any of those things. They don't try to make themselves clear. It seems like the opposite. They're trying to be confusing and incomprehensible. They usually don't actually give serious arguments. They just like assert their thing, and then like they use metaphors. They give you some vague metaphor, and then you're supposed to believe them. and then they almost never address objections. Like, like what would somebody who doesn't agree with me say? They don't do that, right? It's only like the analytic philosophers who do those things. So
yeah. Speaking about appearances, so you're a proponent of phenomenological conservatism, and could you briefly describe what is it? What is this view?
Oh yeah, phenomenal conservatism. So the Greek word phenomena means appearance. Okay, so it's conservatism about appearances. So it's basically the idea that it's rational to assume that things are the way they appear unless you have reason to think otherwise. Right? Okay, so I assume there's a type of mental state or a type of experience that you can have where something seems to you to be the case. And there are different species of this. So this includes sensory appearances. So like, okay, just like it seems like there's a hand here. Or like, it seems to be sort of yellow pink or something. Okay. But it also includes like memory appearances, like I seem to remember eating an egg in the morning or whatever. It also includes intellectual appearances. So if you think about it, it seems like the shortest path between 2 points must be a straight line. If you just consider the proposition, it just seems obvious. Okay. So I'm saying there's a type of experience that you have in all of these cases, which you express by saying it seems that so-and-so. Okay. And if you don't have specific reasons to doubt the appearance, then you have at least some justification to believe that that's the way things are. Okay. So that's basically phenomenal conservatism. I'm allowing that you could have reasons to override the appearances. These reasons would themselves derive from other appearances. Right. So like sometimes appearances conflict with each other. So, there's like the famous Mueller-Lyer illusion where there's like two lines and they look like they're the same length, but you could actually, they've got the arrows pointing in or pointing out. And if you measure them, they're actually the same length, but they look different lengths. Okay. So, it's not that you should always believe the appearances, it's that you should believe the appearances unless there's a reason to doubt them. Right. And what happens in that case is, well, there's a reason to doubt it, which comes from other appearances. Like if you measure them, it's going to appear like whatever, one of them 6 inches and the other one is 6 inches. So, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if it's popular question, but at least among the ordinary people, we can ask, for example, what about other animals, like this famous essay from Thomas Nagel about how it be a bat. Yeah. So how, for example, other animals see the objects. So as I understand, the basic idea of phenomenal conservatism that we see objects directly. Yeah. So we don't infer from our mind this object. But what about other animals? Does this also apply to animals?
Yeah. So, presumably, we don't really know the experiences of the other animals, right? Because it's hard to ask them, or you can ask them, but they don't say very much. Which was why Nagel had that article, "What is it like to be a bat?" Right, with the point being that you can't know. And actually, even if you could talk to the bat, you still wouldn't know because, it has a different kind of sensory experience because it uses echolocation, and it wouldn't be able to explain to us what that was like, even if it could talk. Anyway, but the other animals are going to have sensory experiences that will feel a certain way to them, and that will be how they know about the world, just like it is how we know about the world, because we're animals. So we have sensory faculties just like the other animals do. It's just that in addition to that, we have more more stuff in the frontal lobes, right? So you might think, well, okay, so do the other animals have knowledge just like us? Yes, they don't have as much knowledge, right? But when you start opening the cat food can and then the cat runs over to the kitchen, why is it doing that? It's because it knows that you're opening the cat food. It knows that it's going to be fed or something like that. All right. And okay, so it has a justified belief. right?
Yes.
And, which would be based on its own appearances.
What is your take on this idea of things in themselves, as Kant described?
Yeah. Well, I'm confused about what the distinction was, right, between the things as they appear and things as they are in themselves, or appearances and things in themselves. So you get the sense that things in themselves are just the real objects. Okay, but the thing is, so are there such things? Yeah. So like, look, so I have this thermos here, though it kind of disappears if I move it out of away from me. Anyway, but it's a real thermos. Okay. So is this a thing in itself? No. Okay, we know that Kant would say no, but this is a real object. It exists independent of me. It should be a thing in itself. I don't. What do you mean? Yeah. Okay. So, I guess my answer is, well, I believe the things in themselves are the things that we're perceiving, which is to say, I guess I don't agree with this distinction between the appearances and the things in themselves, right? Because, according to Kant, we're only ever seeing the appearances, right? But this strikes me as a confusion, right? The whole notion of the appearances. So he sometimes says things as they appear, and then sometimes says appearances. And like on the face of it, those are two different things, right? Because in the one phrase, the noun is things. It's things as they appear. And then in the other phrase, the noun is appearance. And I think an appearance is a mental state. So it's not the thing that you're observing. So I think the concept of an appearance in Kant is a confusion. It's a confusion between the object, like the objects that you're perceiving, and your mental state by which you perceive them. And this was like a really common confusion among philosophers like a couple centuries ago. So Bishop Berkeley was constantly making this confusion. He's constantly confusing the mental state that represents objects with the objects represented. And like that's the way his whole argument for idealism goes. Right, but anyway, so my claim is like the concept of an appearance it's that confusion. It refers to both of those things at the same time, but those are not the same things.
Okay, thank you. And speaking about idealism, I know that today we have popular arguments for idealism based on quantum mechanics, that it seems that if we derive to the level of quantum mechanics, we see this mental, foundation for all of this. So maybe the question is, what is your take on metaphysical stance? So what is the foundation of reality? And I know that there is some people who mereological nihilists who say that some fundamental particles is only real. Some people say it's something like spirit. So what is your take on this?
Oh, well, so I'm a mind-body dualist, right? So there are two kinds of things, mental things and physical things. So there's the mind, and then there's the body and all of the physical world. But by the way, I think that if you have a philosophical viewpoint, oh, wait, have I lost you?
No, it's okay.
Sorry, you disappeared for a second there.
Yeah.
I think if you have a philosophical viewpoint that it requires you to talk about quantum mechanics in order to make your point, it's almost certainly wrong. And what usually happens is that somebody is referring to, the least plausible and like most irrational interpretation of quantum mechanics. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Like, okay, in the 20th century, they developed a thing called quantum mechanics, which is there's a certain sort of algorithm for predicting results of experiments, basically. Okay, and the algorithm involves like these mathematical objects. So you have these vectors in a vector space, and then there are mathematical operations that you do on the vectors, and you get probabilities of different outcomes. Okay, and then you can test it, and like the probabilities are really good. It's really well calibrated. Okay, and they make really lots of surprising, very accurate predictions. So we know that the algorithm is basically right. Okay. And then the interpretations of quantum mechanics are explanations of what's going on in the underlying reality, like that would explain why that algorithm works. Okay, and then the sort of orthodox interpretation was the Copenhagen interpretation, which is what you read about in like a lot of pop science presentations. Okay, and it has this stuff about how observers create reality. Okay, it involves that physical systems are in an indeterminate state until you do a measurement or make an observation or something like that. And then as soon as you do that, they randomly jump into one of the possible determinate states. Okay, so then people start saying things like observers create reality or whatever. Okay, but there are many other interpretations that people came up with that would also explain why the same algorithm works, right? Like, and they're approximately like empirically equivalent, like they would make the same predictions. Okay, so like there's the disagreement between the different interpretations of quantum mechanics is mostly non-empirical. It's mostly just a debate about like what is the most reasonable explanation for why this algorithm works with this set of predictions. Okay, so like a more sensible interpretation is David Bohm's interpretation. Okay, and then in the Copenhagen interpretation, you have things in indeterminate states, and I claim that, well, that's impossible, and because that's just incoherent. It just doesn't make any sense. All right, so like I don't need to do experiments to figure out whether that can be, because the very description like is contradictory. Like what you're saying in your interpretation just inherently doesn't make any sense, right? Because like being indeterminate means, something like there's an object and it's either A or B, but it's not A and it's not B. Right? That's basically what indeterminacy means, right? Okay, and like these are examples. Like there's an object that's colored, but it doesn't have any particular color. Okay, that's contradictory. Or there's an object that it's in a box, but it's not in the left half and it's not in the right half. And it's not like split between the two halves, and it's not on the borders. Right? So you list all of the possibilities. It's not any of those, but nevertheless, it's in the box. Okay, that's contradictory, right? So I think you would just rule that out, just from thinking about it. So, okay, anyway, that was a bit of a digression. I don't know how much I answered your question there.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you agree, for example, with like classical philosopher Aristotle on the difference between essence and existence? So we have this like something like spiritual form and also material form that join together and we have objects.
Well, I guess the answer is no, I don't. Aristotle had he has this worldview in which like, okay, there's matter and form, and like things have the forms of things involve these natural functions. So like everything has a function or an end that's built into it, right? Which we call natural teleology, right? The idea that things have inherent ends. And it was not just people that had ends, and it wasn't just conscious beings, right? It was like, you notice how things fall when you drop them, they fall to the ground. And then, but also you notice like when you light a flame, the flame goes up, and like whatever, the hot air balloon rises and stuff. So some things go up and some things go down. You know why that is? It's because everything has a natural place. There are four elements that the world is made of: earth, air, fire, and water. And the natural place of earth is at the center of the cosmos, which is why when you have something with a lot of earth in it and you move it away from the center, it tries to move back. Okay, and the natural place of fire is up there, in the outer sphere. And that's why when you light a match, the flame points up. Okay. This is completely wrong. This is 100% wrong. Okay, and it's not a small thing. It's like this way of thinking that things have natural functions, that there's an end state that a thing is drawn towards. That's throughout his philosophy. That's like a central idea throughout everything that Aristotle is doing. And that's completely wrong, right? With one exception, which is human beings. Human beings actually do have ends that we aim at, and like other conscious beings have ends that they aim at. Okay, but in nature, there's none of that. right? Oh, how do I know that? Well, because we have modern science now, which has explanations of a whole lot of things that are a lot better and can make a lot more and a lot more precise predictions than Aristotle could make. So Aristotle, and if you look at Aristotle's writings, there are not quantitative predictions of anything. So there's like a prediction that if you drop a heavier object, it will fall faster than a lighter object, which is, sort of true, but sort of not true. Okay. But there's no quantitative prediction. Okay. And that's one of the ways in which it's a bad theory. We have modern science, which makes quantitative predictions, which are quantitatively accurate, which is how you know that it's a good theory and that it's basically right. And it does not use natural functions, right, to explain anything other than the behavior of conscious beings, right? And so that's how we know that Aristotle is basically wrong. And this thing about matter and form, that doesn't play any role in modern scientific explanations of how the world works.
Okay. And so it is interesting that you're an agnostic, but also dualist. And we have some Christian philosophers who are not agnostic, but they're not dualist too. So they are physicalist or materialist. And I have one quote and one argument from Peter van Inwagen, the famous Christian philosopher who is a physicalist. And so he writes, and I hope you can understand what I write. So the dualist who asserts that souls and sensations occur as a change as a changes in a thing, all of whose properties are mental, has done no more to address the mystery of soul and sensation that has a physicalist who asserts that souls and sensation occurs as change in a physical thing. It is true that no one has any account of how souls and sensations could be features of physical organism. In fact, no one could say what an account of this would like even in the broadest outline. So he's basically argues that it's true that physicalists can't explain how it could be, but he argues also that for dualists it is also a problem because we have no idea how it can be that we have souls and sensation in our soul. So he argues that basically we have on the same epistemological level of understanding from both sides. So what do you think about this?
I'm confused about what the problem is supposed to be for the dualist. Okay, so I feel like I know what the problem is for the physicalist. You said it was something like, well, we can't explain how, I don't know, you can't explain how mental states could be physical, right? But I would say it's more like they're obviously not physical. So that is, somebody asked you, okay, there's physical, give me examples of physical things. I don't know, like a rock, and okay, whatever, and the pencil. And okay, now give me examples of non-physical things. Like, what is the clearest, most paradigmatic example of something that isn't physical? I don't know, like a thought or a feeling. And if you're going to say that that's physical, then I feel like I don't know what the word physical means anymore. I thought that was the clearest example you could come up with of something that the word physical wouldn't cover. But anyway, okay. So, and it's why can't that be physical? I don't know. Why can't the number 2 be a physical object? Just, just if I know anything about it. Okay, anyway. But what's the problem supposed to be for the dualist? I don't get it. I can't explain how I could have sensations. Why is it puzzling? Okay, so what the non-physical thing is the mind or the soul. Okay, and how can it have sensations and mental states? Well, what do you mean? It's a mind. What else would have mental states besides a mind? And I don't get it. Sometimes people say the problem is to explain how the mental states could interact with the physical states. How do physical states cause mental states, or how do mental states cause physical states? Maybe that's the problem. But I note that the people who say this, they don't generally demand explanations of causal laws for anything else, right? So if you say, oh, looks like there's this law of gravity thing where massive bodies attract each other, explain how that's possible. And then right, either there's no explanation or the explanation is just to write down the law of gravity. No, okay, but then you say, okay, and why is the law of gravity true? That's just how it is, okay? Or, if you like Newton's law could be explained by Einstein's general relativity, but, okay, explain why Einstein's general relativity is true. Okay, there's no explanation of that. Okay, so the explanation, to the extent that there is an explanation, the explanation for the mind-body interaction would consist of writing down the psychophysical laws. In fact, no one has done that, so in that sense, we don't have the explanation, right? And so we have to do more scientific investigation. But I don't see any obvious reason why that couldn't be done. I don't know why there can't be psychophysical laws, right? So laws that describe the interaction between mental and physical things. I don't know why that can't be so. And then when we find out what those laws are, we're not going to know why those laws obtain. But it's also true of all the other fundamental laws of nature that we don't know why they obtain. Right? And by the way, it's pretty hard to see how you could explain that. Right? Because they're the foundation for other explanations. When you explain why stuff happens in the world, there are fundamental laws that underlie those explanations. But then how could there be an explanation of why the laws are the way they are? Like you try to cite other laws, okay, well then those would be the fundamental laws, and then we still wouldn't have an explanation of those. And then, you cite something other than the laws, but it's hard to see what that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like this trivial questions. Why me is me? Well, because it's me, maybe. Yeah, we don't have any other explanation of this fact. Yeah, maybe because the way it is, something like this.
Yeah, right. I mean, there has to be a basis for explanations. If you're explaining something, there must be some other thing that you're taking for granted in order to explain it, right? And so, presumably, there are some fundamental things, or maybe there's an infinite regress, right? Right, but there's probably not an infinite regress of laws. There might be an infinite regress of concrete events, events in the concrete world, right? But not of laws, I don't think.
And do you think that we can resolve this free will question because we have soul, or do you think that free will is possible in the strictly materialistic sense?
Oh yeah. Well, if physicalism were true, I would say then nobody would have free will. But that's part of why you should reject physicalism, right? Yeah. And why do I say that? Well, if physicalism is true, then all of your behavior is explained by the behavior of physical particles that are solely acting according to the laws of physics. And those particles acting according to the laws of physics are not sensitive to reasons for doing anything. Okay, so everything that you're doing is the outcome of just kind of blind and natural forces. And by the way, presumably you can't violate the laws of nature. So if the laws of nature are deterministic, then your behavior would have to be deterministic, right? Or the laws of physics. Okay, and if the laws of physics are indeterministic, as in some interpretations of quantum mechanics, still in those interpretations, what the particles do is just random at particular times, right? It's just subject to chance. It's not determined by logical reasons, good reasons for doing things. It just does something by chance. Okay, so then it would seem that if all of your behavior is the outcome of either completely determined motions of particles or sometimes random motions of particles, then it seems like you don't have free will, right? If it's all determined, then you don't have free will because you don't have different alternatives open to you. You can only do one thing, right? But if it's sometimes random, then you still don't have free will because it's you can't control what the elementary particles randomly do. And so therefore you can't control your own actions. And so, And so it looks like the only way to have free will is, there's something other than the little particles moving around according to the laws of physics. And that other thing would be your mind. And so sometimes your thoughts affect your behavior. I assume this requires what they call downward causation in philosophy of mind. With that, so the mental states affect the affect the particles in your brain, which in turn affect the way your body moves.
Yeah, and I remember you debate with Robert Sapolsky about this question, and it's always strike me as very strange when people come to conclusions that we have no free will, because it seems to me very self-refuting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I tried to make that point. Yeah, so like there's a debate between me and Robert Sapolsky on YouTube, where okay, so he has a book where he says that we don't have free will, but I couldn't figure out what his argument was, right? Or okay, like he gave examples of times when it looks like your behavior is influenced by things that you wouldn't be aware of. There'd be psychological factors influencing your behavior that are not good reasons that you wouldn't be aware of, and if you were aware of them, you wouldn't approve of them. Okay, so like, judges making parole decisions, they would be influenced by whether they were hungry or not, okay, or like how tired they were, and that's not supposed to influence your decisions. And the judge probably isn't aware that that's influencing his decision, and he wouldn't like it if he was, okay. But okay, so then that suggests that the decision that the judge made is not totally up to him, right? Because okay, it's not controlled by what he would want it to be controlled by. Okay, and then my response to that was, okay, but suppose that there's a judge who is fully rested and fully fed. It's possible to do that, right? It's possible to have that situation. So that guy would have free will, right? Because if you just remove the things that are interfering with a person's judgment, then they'll be able to exercise good judgment, whatever. And then, as far as I can tell, he didn't really have a response to that. I don't know, like, yes, there are times when your decision making is impaired, but then there are other times when it's not. So I don't get what the problem is, right? But then, and then I tried to make the point that there was something self-defeating about denying free will. And, like one version of this is, well, if you ever engage in deliberation, then you're presupposing that you have options open to you. If you deliberate about whether to do A or B, in doing that, you are assuming that you have A and B open to you. So you cannot be deliberating about whether to do A or B and then simultaneously insist that you don't have any choice about whether you do A or B. Okay, and then the next step in this argument is, well, when you're thinking about the whole free will issue and like you're deciding what to believe about it, that's a form of deliberation. So if you're thinking about the free will issue at all, you have to believe in free will. Okay, and like you can't deliberate about free will and then come to the conclusion that you don't have it, because then you were sort of like undermining yourself. Okay, and then like as far as I could tell, he didn't have an answer to that. Like the anti-free will people don't really have an answer to these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as I know, the most popular argument is like, if we don't have determinism, we have randomness, because otherwise we can't have answer why we choose this one or not this one. And I suppose we can answer, as you previously said, that we can ask similar questions about laws of gravity. Why laws of gravity this one and not this one? Yeah. So maybe because it's just brute fact, because I choose this one and not this one. And we don't have any other explanation of why I choose this one and not this one.
Yeah. There has to be an end to explanation somewhere. But like what is the alternative to your action was predetermined? It was determined according to antecedent causes, or it was random. Well, I guess the alternative is that the choice was made by me. So like some people in the free will literature refer to agent causation, which is where an event was caused by the agent or caused by the person rather than being caused by some particular event. Okay, so like you have a decision, you got to do A or B, and like nothing is going to make you do it, but it's also not that one of them is just going to randomly happen. What's going to happen is that you're going to cause one of the two outcomes, and that counts as it being a free choice. All right, and and then like the anti-free will people say, oh, but what caused you to cause one of these? So you caused option A to be chosen, but what caused you to cause that? Right? Well, yeah, nothing caused me to cause it. I just did. I was like an uncaused cause, right? A prime mover, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about prime mover, so how do you become agnostic, or you always be agnostic, or you sometimes believe in God? So what is your path to this question?
Well, I guess I used to be atheist and then I became agnostic. So, okay. And well, the process was like, I guess my initial thinking was, this is highly improbable if there's not some reason for believing it. Highly improbable that there's a God if there's not some reason for believing it. And then, like, a little bit later, I thought about the problem of evil. Like, there's a lot of bad stuff in the world. I don't know why a perfect being would allow all this bad stuff to happen. It doesn't seem like they would. It seems like they would make a perfect world, and this isn't a perfect world. And then I started becoming, I guess, whatever, more open to theism, more friendly to theism when I started thinking about the fine-tuning argument. So, like one of the biggest mysteries about the universe is kind of like, well, I don't know. There's a mystery about why we're here. Okay, there's a mystery about like why there's any order in the universe at all, right? Or any non-trivial amount of order. And there's a mystery about why there's life in particular, okay? There has to be a lot of order in order for there to be life. And roughly what I mean by this is, okay, there's a whole bunch of particles in the universe. If you just imagine them being randomly distributed, almost every possible distribution of the particles is one of like just total disorder, like total entropy, okay? As they say in physics, almost all arrangements are thermal equilibrium, right? Which is a state that from the macroscopic perspective would look totally uniform. There wouldn't be any order. There certainly wouldn't be any life forms or anything like that. So like we wonder about that. And then, it turns out that these astronomers and cosmologists have thought about why the laws of nature are the way they are. There are particular parameters in the laws of nature that you could imagine having different values. So like there's the gravitational constant, or there's the mass of the proton, or the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force, and things like that. Okay. And it turns out that if you imagine, there's just several of these parameters that if you imagine them being a little bit different from what they are, you could predict that life would be impossible. All right, so it's things like if the gravitational constant were a little bit stronger, then after the Big Bang, the universe would have recollapsed long before stars formed. In which case, then, and then just goes into a black hole. And there's no planets, there's no life or anything. But if the gravitational constant were a little bit weaker, then the universe would have expanded too quickly for stars to form. And so there'd just be a giant cloud of hydrogen gas or something like that, okay? And then there'd be no life. So there's a question like, why is there life? And, that's kind of weird. And so a theory is, well, okay, intelligent design. So maybe there's an intelligent being that has some kind of ability to affect the values of those parameters. And that being realized that like everything good requires there to be some amount of order in the universe. And, like most good things require there to be life. So, the being arranged the parameters to allow life to be possible. Okay, so I don't know whether this is correct, but it seems like a not unreasonable argument, right? And like I thought about it, and I discussed it in this book, Knowledge, Reality, and Value, where most of the responses to the fine-tuning argument are no good. And so when I figured that out, I thought, like that's a not unreasonable theory. Not unreasonable to think that there was an intelligent designer.
So you think that you could be rational as a theist and you could be rational as an atheist, is it correct?
Yeah. So like, why is this not ultimately convincing? Well, first, we don't really know. Like maybe there are other explanations that we haven't thought of. So maybe it's just something we haven't thought of as the explanation. Okay. And again, there's still like the problem of evil. So like, like we don't have a good explanation for everything, like why there's life, but also why things aren't better. If there was an intelligent designer, why didn't he make things even better?
Yeah, and problem of evil is also very important for us in Ukraine because we have war in Ukraine, and we also think about these questions. And It is
Yeah.
hard. It is
Yeah, like
hard.
I feel like if I was God, I would just like give Putin a heart attack. Or you don't even have to be all powerful, right? If you were just like a moderately powerful being, seems like you could do that.
Yeah, it seems so. And you know, when I read like this popular atheists like Dawkins and Hitchens, they like these Christians or theists as irrational and so on. But when I start to read like deep thinkers like you and other non-Christian philosopher, but you're actually much more on the side of like theism, that this new atheism movement that say that we are like it's all irrational stuff and so on. So I think that when we start thinking more deep, we came to like more modest conclusion, I suppose. So we don't have this bunch of good slogans.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that happens a lot. Like, you get on one side early in your life, and then you just sort of like become more extreme. You're just because you hang around with the other atheists, or you hang around with the other Christians, as the case may be, and then you just hear more and more stuff on that side, and then you just get more and more convinced, and then you just start to think the other side is crazy. Okay, but it's really just like a psychological phenomenon in your mind that's making you think that.
Yeah. And also speaking about agreement with Christianity, I see that you and also other fine philosophers actually agree with moral realism. That also like hard questions for new atheism, because they don't like this idea of that we have objective moral values. But you're on the side of moral realism, and I suppose question: how did you come to conclusions that we have objective moral values?
Yeah, well, I thought about it and it was obvious. Right. So, like, here's an example. Should we torture babies just for fun? What do you think? No, no, it seems like that would be wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So I think that would be wrong. Okay. Okay. Wait. Okay. So there's at least one thing that would be wrong. Okay. But is that an objective fact? Okay. Well, what's the alternative? So, like, the alternative might be it's subjective. And what does that mean? I guess that means that it depends upon the attitudes of the observer. Okay. So imagine that I had different attitudes. So if I really hated babies, then would it be okay for me to torture babies for fun? No. Okay. Well, okay. What other attitude do you want to imagine? Like, if I approved of torturing babies, would it be okay to torture them? No, still no, right? Just seems obvious. Okay. Well, what if like my society approved of torturing babies? Like, imagine a society in which there are different conventions, and they say that you're allowed to torture babies. Would it then be okay? Like, still seems like it would be obviously wrong. Right. So it seems like it's not subjective. Like, it doesn't depend upon the culture. It doesn't depend upon the attitudes of the individual. So that's kind of the definition of an objective truth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have any idea of grounding morality? For example, maybe some Platonic objects like Willenberg argue, something like this.
Yeah. Well, I am a Platonist. I have all of these, highly controversial views, controversial among contemporary academic philosophers. But many of them strike me as kind of trivial, like just like obviously true. Like, free will is just obvious. Mind-body dualism is obvious. Moral realism is obvious. Okay, these are all controversial but completely obvious. Okay, and Platonism is another one of these. Which some people describe as a crazy view, but I describe as just like trivially true. Okay. So anyway, meaning, there are abstract objects, or there are universals. Okay. Like, what are universals? Universals are something that could be shared by more than one particular thing. Okay. So like redness, there could be more than one particular red thing. So there's something that two different red things have in common. What they have in common is the universal redness. It's not any particular physical object, right? Okay. So anyway, like in some sense, there's an abstract object, redness, right? Abstract because that's not a particular physical object, because it's shared by different physical objects. Okay. And the moral properties are also abstract objects in that sense. So That is, moral goodness is abstract, or it's universal in the same sense that redness is, or squareness, or the number 2. Okay. Now, is that a grounding for morality? Well, that's just to say that there are these abstract objects. They have a certain nature. You wouldn't normally think that that was enough to explain the ground for a subject matter. Like, you're like, why is my shirt red? You wouldn't just say, well, like there's an abstract object called redness, right? Well, no, there's particular facts about the shirt. And yes, there's an abstract object called redness, right? Anyway, so there's the abstract object like goodness and wrongness and whatever. And also there are particular facts, like, there are particular facts about an action. Like, when you torture the babies, there are particular just descriptive facts about it, like it causes pain to them. And like that's what makes it wrong, roughly speaking, something like that. The particular facts together with just the nature of wrongness. Okay, but that's just like, that's true of everything. Like I'm not saying some special weird thing about morality. It's true of everything. Like every fact that you identify, there's an abstract object involved. The truth of that fact or whatever depends on the nature of the abstract object and the nature of the particular object. The particular object is instantiating the abstraction.
Okay. And so you argue against this evolutionary skepticism about morality, and you argue against this on the historical moral progress argument. So we have this moral progress, but also we have like some authors and darker angels of our nature, and these
it's called
authors
the better angels of our nature.
Yeah. And so they argue that actually we don't have like moral progress at all, and this is like just maybe just superficial appearances. So what do you think about this like skepticism?
Oh wait, I think that might be a book that I haven't seen. Is there like there's a counter to Steven Pinker that's arguing against it? So just like roughly, there's been enormous progress. So like here's some background. Okay, in the earlier decades when people were arguing about moral realism, there were these moral relativists who were going around saying, there's so much variation in moral codes across societies. Different societies don't agree on any moral truths. I don't think it was actually true that they didn't agree on anything, but they disagreed about a lot of things. Okay, they would have things like there's a society in which homosexuality is fine, and then there'd be another society in which it's strongly disapproved, right? Or there'd be many societies that practice polygamy, and then there'd be other societies that would say polygamy was wrong. Okay, so there'd be a lot of disagreement. Then the relativists would say, so that suggests that there's no one moral truth, and you might say, no, what do you mean? Like, maybe it's just that a bunch of people are wrong. Okay, but the argument was something like, well, but if there were objective facts and we had a way of identifying them, you would expect people to do a better job of identifying them, at which point they would start to agree. Okay, now, enter me and Steven Pinker and, people like us. Well, actually, that is happening. That is, people are starting to agree. So they didn't start out agreeing, but over time, people tend to converge on certain kinds of values, which you could broadly describe as liberal values. So the amount of diversity is decreasing, and there's a particular value system that the world is moving towards over a course of centuries and millennia. Okay, so like it used to be that slavery was widely practiced around the world. And, starting a couple hundred years ago, like 1800s, countries started to decide this wasn't such a good idea. I think maybe enslaving other people was unjust. And then they started abolishing it. And then like by the 20th century, every country in the world abolished it. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So it turns out that what the cultural relativists were saying as evidence for relativism, kind of the opposite of that is the truth. So like, okay, it was the case in the past that there was a lot of disagreement, but there's less and less disagreement. And this is exactly what you would expect about an area in which there are objective facts and we have a way of knowing them. Because like this is the way it is in areas of science as well. in scientific questions, people started out with a lot of disagreement. So like there were different theories about where the Earth came from. If you go to different cultures, they had all kinds of stories about the origin of the Earth, which, by the way, are completely wrong and conflict with each other. But over time, we gradually figure out the truth. And so like, more and more people around the world and people in different societies are coming to agree upon the basic story about where the Earth came from. Right. So, okay. So, it looks like what's going on with morality is kind of like what's going on with other areas in which there are truths to be discovered, right?
Yeah. And so sometimes it is hard, and I think people just presuppose that morality should be obvious or easy, but in every aspect of our life we have hard questions, and morality is not exception, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, just human beings did not start out. We're not born knowing how the world is. We're not born knowing the truth about reality and everything in it. And like the human species did not start out knowing the truth. Like whatever, when we were cavemen, right? We started out completely wrong about almost everything, and then we had to gradually claw our way up towards the truth. And like that's how it worked in every field. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe on some like practical recommendations, what is your favorite, maybe ancient philosopher and modern philosopher? Who could you recommend?
I don't really like the historical figures that much. Like I guess Plato is the most fun to read, right? But like the ancient philosophers were completely wrong. So I mean, like it's misleading to recommend them. Like Plato is fun to read, but keep in mind that he's totally wrong. And he's not that good at reasoning, like doesn't have that good arguments. And like, what's a good modern philosopher? Actually, I think Thomas Reid is pretty good. Okay, so like he's not as important as Descartes. So Descartes is, one of my favorites in this sort of modern period. But and he got the mind-body dualism thing right, But Thomas Reid is sort of like he's more correct, but also he's sort of like less important because he didn't have as many big ideas, or sort of just like he had this idea of let's stick with common sense. And also, I think the stuff that we perceive, I think we perceive the real physical objects, not images of them. All right. Okay. And like uses that to respond to the arguments of Berkeley and Locke. But okay. Well, but like, by the way, for viewers, in case they don't know this, the way philosophers talk, modern philosophy is like, the 17th and 18th century. and so, that's modern. It's 300 years ago, but it's modern. And then, but, basically I think that, well, people didn't know that much back then. Philosophy was in kind of a primitive state. We got a lot of things wrong. We had a lot of bad arguments, and like, there are a lot of people who are kind of better at reasoning today. Like most philosophers today are a lot less interesting, and they take on much smaller issues, but they're less likely to make mistakes. Like they're better reasoners, better at like giving an argument that's correct, or at least doesn't have big obvious flaws.
Yeah. And maybe what's some books that you recommend for our listeners? Maybe some list of your favorite books.
Yeah. Oh, wait. What about this great book? Reality. Everybody should buy this one right now. Really, the most important thing is to buy it.
Yeah, I have to.
Usually people want me to recommend someone other than myself. So, okay. So, like, what do you do after you read all of my books, right? Because there's like 10 of them. So you could finish those in a few years. What do you do after that? Other good philosophers, in recent times, there's John Searle. His work in philosophy of mind is very interesting and good and plausible. There's David Stove, the Australian philosopher of science. I like his book about induction, but he also has some stuff that hilariously makes fun of other philosophers. So that's good. Who else? If you're into analytic academic philosophy. Timothy Williamson is a brilliant philosopher. And, like his book, Knowledge and Its Limits, and his book about vagueness, those are very good. Oh, and also, of course, Bertrand Russell. And so, like for a good introduction to philosophy, Russell's Problems of Philosophy is a good introduction.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have maybe some interesting Christian philosophers that you like to engage or in discussions?
I don't know. I've appeared on a bunch of podcasts, and so I appeared. There's a podcast called Parker's Pensée, although he pronounces it Parker's Pensies because he doesn't want to sound too hoity-toity or whatever. So he's like a hardcore Christian. I've appeared on his podcast multiple times, and so that's fun. We haven't really debated Christianity, though. We talk about other things. So yeah, I don't know. And anyone else? I have the sense that I have a bunch of Christian Facebook friends and stuff like that, but I haven't really been talking about it. We haven't been talking about Christianity. It's just that I think there's a bunch of them are Christians, and then whatever, sometimes you can tell from their posts, they're posting something about God or the Bible.
Yeah, I suppose you're one of the favorite philosophers among Christians from the secular side.
That's right. I'm one of the favorite non-Christian philosophers among Christians, and I wondered why that was, because I'm not a Christian. But one thought is, but I'm not hostile. And a lot of non-Christians are hostile to Christianity. And the other thing is that, I'm not taken in by, I don't know, the alternative ideologies of the modern time, like the ideologies of Marxism or scientism or logical positivism. I'm not taken in by any of those. And the Christians agree with me about a lot of things that are considered important, like mind-body dualism and moral realism and whatever. It's frequently, but not always, Platonism. And why do I agree with the Christians about all those things? I think the answer is all those things are just obvious. They're just obvious truths. The real question is, why are there a bunch of people disagreeing with them? And basically, a bunch of other people have been captured by alternative ideologies. And the Christians haven't been captured by those alternative ideologies because they have their own. They have their own belief system. So they're immune from logical positivism. Okay. But I'm immune from those other ideologies because I care about the truth. And, I don't want to follow an ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then maybe last question. What would you recommend to the beginners? How much time should we spend to study philosophy to become at least philosopher who understand philosophy, maybe not amateur philosopher who understand philosophy a little bit? So what is your advice? How much time we should spend on this?
I don't know. I think it sounds discouraging to answer that question, honestly, but I feel like my thinking got clearer over a period of years. I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy at UC Berkeley. And I feel like my thinking was getting clearer over the 4 years of doing that degree. But then I think I made further progress, getting a PhD at Rutgers. That was another 6 years. You're like, oh, okay. And then maybe at the end of that, maybe at the end of the decade, I stopped, making more progress in just being able to think clearly. So studying philosophy for a decade, and that sounds discouraging to people because they don't want to do that. But it's not painful. It's it's fun and interesting, or at least it is for some of us, right? And if you find it painful, then this is you're not going to do it. It doesn't matter what I say. If you find it interesting, then you can do it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find it interesting, and I find it's very important because it's most fundamental questions of our life. So I really like your work, and thank you so much. And again, your book, I left link in the description box for our folks. So it's really great stuff, and I enjoy it. Thank you so much for your work. And Maybe we will see in the future. Who knows? But God bless you, I suppose, if he exists. So
great. No, thanks for having me. It's been great talking to you, and anytime.